Hey guys, welcome back to the Black Hills and Eastern Railroad. Today I am working on push-pull push rods for turnout control on my HO scale model railroad, the Black. So I selected this method as a very reliable and cost-effective method of controlling turnouts on my layout here in the Sioux City Yard.
Black Hills and Eastern Railroad, from the plains of the Sioux Empire to the heart of the hills.
To support the dowel push rod, I made myself a pedestal block for the eye bolt to mount to using some scrap plywood and a 1x2. I marked the drill places for the mounting holes and then a pilot hole for the eye bolt. I glued the 1x2 to the plywood. Here I am drilling out the mount holes on the plywood. I just used plain white glue to affix the 1x2 to the scrap plywood. I'd already screwed in the eye bolt by this point. I used a clamp to make sure that the 1x2 affixed securely with the glue to the plywood. Here's a quick side view of what those pedestals look like with the eye bolts affixed. Then here I am under the layout installing that first pedestal block for the push rod. Notice that that's set back a ways from the switch point where the throw bar or the music wire comes down through the layout benchwork. So then I mark the place where the wire is going to come down through the dowel so I can drill later. Drill through the dowel for the wire up on the benchwork. I think I'm using a 1/16 bit here. I purchased some of these 1/4-inch dowels at Home Depot and the other part of them at Fleet Farm. The music wire came from my local hobby shop, but I'm guessing you can purchase that about anywhere online. I'm learning to prefer the heavier gauge music wire rather than the lighter gauge, just for the long runs that I'm using. I put a drop of glue on the dowel before I reinsert it through the fascia and then thread it up underneath the benchwork through that pedestal and eye bolt that I put on earlier. We're also going to have to fit that music wire through the dowel in the same motion as attaching it to the pedestal. So then we see that point move as expected with the dowel going back and forth on the fascia. I'd call that success, huh? And then the fun part here, I use a razor saw to cut the dowels to length so they don't intrude too far into the aisle here. So then we move on to the second phase of the project, which is powering that frog, or at least getting a wire to the frog so we can power it up later if we want to. Here I am tinning that green wire, and I've standardized on green for the lead to the frog, which is electrically isolated from the rest of the track here, as you see in the background, that Atlas curve switch. That's a code 100 there, being in the Sioux City Yard. This is on the north end of the Sioux City Yard, and that frog there, of course, is metal. And you can see there's a solder pad that Atlas has provided off to the side. Remember that as we move through the other types of switches in this video here. So I'm just tinning the wire, and then I'll tin the solder pad and then attach the wire to the solder pad itself. And then at this point we're done with the wiring on this particular switch for the time being. So then we move on to the older style of Atlas switch where the frog is made out of pot metal. And you can see here for probably the only time you'll ever see me using a bright boy on the layout, and we're going to shine up the places where somebody had painted this switch. You remember that this is all secondhand track, flex track and switches. Someone had painted the frog here, so I'm shining that up so we can attach solder in the wire. You might remember that I'm using all reclaimed switches and flex track here in the Sioux City Yard. I mentioned that before, and some of these switches have had their frogs painted. So as we look to attach electrical contacts to that, you'll see me, probably the only time you'll see me use a bright boy here on the channel is to shine up the little loop that Atlas gave to attach wire to. And this is pot metal. This is that kind of that same stuff that comes on old Athearn Blue Box wheels, locomotive wheels. And you can't solder to this stuff, or at least you can't solder to and expect to have anything but a cold solder joint. So I'm drilling this out and letting the drill keyhole just a little bit as I drill that loop out on the frog. And I'm going to insert a 172 screw here, a brass screw that I got online. I found these. Buy them at 100 at a time, and they're pretty expensive, but this is really a godsend. And if I'd known about this, I would have installed the screw from the bottom of the switch before I got started, but I'm not going to go back and tear up all these switches so I can put that brass screw in from the bottom. You need a really steady hand here, but once you've got that screw installed, it's really easy to solder to, and you get a good solid joint to your frog. And here I am with a really small flathead screwdriver driving that screw into that loop that we drilled out just now. So then, in order to disguise that shiny solder joint, I'm going to come back after the solder joint is cooled off a little bit and cover with some cheap craft paint from Walmart. I'm using burnt umber here, but it'd probably be fine to use a flat black or some other really dark color. By the time we get weeds growing in the yard here and a little ballast and some mud and stuff like that, you won't be able to even notice that exists unless you're really looking for it. Being careful to avoid places where the flanges and the wheel faces will actually make contact with the rails, because we want to preserve continuity here from the rail to the wheel, or from the frog to the wheel. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode on the Black Hills and Eastern Railroad. If you did, smash that like button, subscribe for more. Don't miss an episode, and hopefully we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, everybody.